Hello artists and welcome back to another art tutorial with Mr. White. Today we're talking about the basic techniques in colored pencil. For this we're going to need some colored pencils, either a kit or a fistful. We're going to use some sandpaper and a blending stump and some isopropyl on a Q-tip. You could also use baby oil, but I kind of prefer the isopropyl. For this we're going to use half a page in our journal, and I'm just dividing my page in half. And I'm going to recreate the effects shown on the bottom left, that colored pencil exercise. And we're also going to add one other piece in. It's very quick and easy. So we're going to start by laying out the page, and then we're going to label the different effects we're going to create. We start with a column of rectangles, which has a tall rectangle, two shorter rectangles, and another tall one on the bottom. Then we're going to draw a couple of squares beside it, and we're going to squeeze in a third box. It could be a square, it could be a little bit skinnier as a rectangle. We don't need quite as much space for that last one, but it can be kind of cool in some circumstances. We're going to put a couple of cubes beneath there as well. And hopefully you've completed the ebony pencil or shading pencil exercise, so this is all pretty familiar to you. So next we're going to label these boxes, and I lost a little bit of the footage here, but the boxes on the left are shade, heavy pressure, light pressure, and tint. And then moving across the page we have a gradient, we are color blending, we're going to cross hatch or cross hatching, and the two cubes will be a wave texture and wood grain texture. And of course, since these are cubes, they're going to have three different sides with three different values to the color and texture that we create. So I'm going to take a colored pencil, going to get it good and sharp, and I'm going to start with a heavy pressure box, filling a box as completely as possible, getting the darkest, richest color I can. Notice I'm using a consistent direction, although I did outline the box to try to have a neater effect. And I'm going to, off screen, I'm just cleaning a blending stump, and I'm going to blend that box as well. Or maybe not. In our next box, though, we're going to use a light pressure, and we're going to fill the entire box as evenly as possible with as little pressure on our pencil as possible, trying to get a very, very light version of the color. Now that we've kind of dialed in our two extremes, we're going to fill the shade and tint box with a medium pressure, trying to have a controlled direction in our mark, and trying to fill the box in a way that it feels and looks fairly flat. We don't have a lot of texture, and the color is even. And we know a shade is when we add black to a color, so I here am making a gradient with the black colored pencil on top of my medium pressure of the original color. And now I'm using a blending stump to try to smooth that out. I recommend, at least with the black, using a gradient. You can get kind of a wide range of values and shades that look really cool and interesting to use. A tint is when we add white to a color, and I try to use a gradient here, but white colored pencil is a lot less powerful, and so it doesn't overlap to the same extreme. We do notice that using white on a colored pencil of course lightens it, but it also blends the color somewhat. As we move on to our next box, we're going to use a single color and make a gradient, trying to gain some more control over our colored pencil. And I am a fan of the technique of shading one corner of the box, and then completely as dark as possible, and then moving to the opposite corner and working from my light tone toward that dark value. Notice I kind of go back and forth. I work across the page or across the box a couple of times. That's okay. And I sped up my work time, so it's going to take you a little longer, that's okay. Now here, I'm using a little bit of isopropyl on a Q-tip. You could also use baby oil for this. I'm only using this on half of the box, but I think it's an interesting effect that we can use to sort of blend the colored pencil so it feels smoother and flatter. It can be useful to use when we're coloring a lot of different things. It doesn't show up that great on camera, but I think that you'll have better luck with it in your experience. And for our next box, we're going to make a color blend, which is, in this case, we're going to make a gradient with two different colors, hopefully two colors that will look good together, and we're going to have them be running in opposite directions. Our goal here is to try to have a smooth transition from one color to the other without some clear line where one color ends and the other begins. And so a gradient is a perfect way to start that effect. So I've colored one edge with the deep red. I'm using blue on the opposite side, hoping to get a nice, smooth, purpley transition area in the middle. You'll notice that I color each color past the middle, although not all the way to the far corner, and that I controlled the direction of my mark, first going in one direction, and now as I add a second layer, marking perpendicularly. Notice also, I work back and forth on this. It's not all done at once. Maybe some really super great artists could do that, but I know that I need to take a little bit of back and forth to judge whether I've got a smooth transition or not. And I recommend, once again, using that isopropyl to kind of blend the half of this box. You don't have to, and again, you can use baby oil. Either one is fine. But it's kind of a nice thing, and it helps to smooth out that transition. Now here I'm just using the blending stump, and I'm trying to get a similar effect. And I noticed that the blending stump does a pretty good job, although I have a bit more of the original pencil texture. Both are useful techniques to know. For our next box, we're going to do cross-hatching, and with this, we're going to use two different colors in two different directions to just sort of experiment with a different kind of color and texture that we can create. I tried to sort of create a gradient where it's heavier green in one corner, heavier orange on the other, and then the two colors overlap one another. It's good to practice making a gradient, and it's good to practice drawing with the tip of our colored pencil, and this can be a useful effect for a variety of fabrics or other things. For our next box, we're going to make waves, but we're on a cube now, so we're going to be doing three sides in three different values. Waves we think of as lines that layer. They have a sort of a curve to them, somewhat curving downward up to points. The peaks of each wave we do not want to exactly match up. Waves aren't exactly the same size. They vary, they change. So on the top and the front, I'm using a flat piece of my colored pencil tip, and I am creating a base value in light pressure. On the right hand side, the darker side of this, I'm using a medium pressure. You'll notice that there's some white space in between my lines, and I'm going to use another color of blue or gray and draw in a medium pressure in lines in those white spaces, although I'm trying to leave some of that white space as well. I actually think this looks best when you add a third color into the mix, but definitely use two different colors of blue that will look good together. And on the darker side, I'm doing the same thing, except instead of using a light pressure base and a medium pressure of the second layer, I'm using a medium pressure base and a heavy pressure on the second layer. I also went in on the dark side and I filled in almost all of those white spaces to give it a little bit of a deeper feel. And now we're on our final texture, and this is going to be to create a wood grain. So to do this, we want to think about what we know about wood and how it grows. We're going to get a dark brown pencil, and we're going to divide our box into three approximately even rectangles. Each of these is going to be a board. And boards are made from trees. Trees grow in rings. These rings show up in boards as sort of slightly curving or angling lines that grow in layers. So we're going to, as in our previous cubes, make a lighter value with lighter pressure on the top, and we're going to try to use some lines that form layers one after another, or concentric lines. We might have a bit of a wave to some of these lines. They could be organic and somewhat sort of swooping and curvy, like the ones we see on the face of the cube that I'm drawing now. They could all run at a single angle, or we could have a circle or an ellipse, which an ellipse is a shape kind of like an oval but with pinched corners instead of round on the short sides. There are a lot of different textures for wood grain, but most of them are going to be linear, with shapes that run primarily horizontally rather than vertically, that are going to form repeating layers that get progressively either bigger or smaller depending on which direction you're going. I also find that making this wood grain works really well if I add a second color. So just like before, on my dark side, I'm using a darker base value. I'm going to go in and add another layer with a different brown. So you can find more of a medium brown or a darker brown maybe. In this video, I actually go in a third layer and add in sort of another lighter brown as well. So I have 3 values of brown in these boards. All of them are following the same basic shape and structure that I laid out in the original, in the base layer. I took a moment here and I just sort of darkened up the line in between the boards just to clarify things a little bit. I'm just feeling like at this point things are a little bit unclear. I'm filling in some of the white negative space in here. But I need to go in with a tip or point of a pencil and use a heavier pressure on both of these front and right hand sides to really define that wood grain texture. So that's what I'm going to do next. And you can see I've started to do that a little bit on the right hand side already. So go ahead and explore and experiment with this texture. Thanks for watching and happy making.